ஒரே எதிர்காலத்தை நோக்கி நடக்கிறோம்.
Election about identity, loyalty.
Bye bye Stalin.
Dravida model versus double engine की सरकार.
बीजेपी एनडीए की डबल इंजन सरकार बनना तय है.
The stakes are high.
From the ground, the questions that matter, the voices that shape the vote. India votes only on News9.
The LPG shortage is now being felt across several cities in India. Our reporters travel across the country to bring you the ground reality.
It's impacting your and my kitchen.
Gas crisis hits kitchen fires. Restaurants and small businesses shutting down.
Very difficult because everything runs on LPG.
Supply shortage, hoarding or panic buying.
कहाँ भी कोई भी 3,000 दे तुरंत सिलेंडर मिलेगा.
What's the government doing to control the crisis?
So the question is whether India is prepared.
News9 ground reports.
Growing uncertainty over the availability of LPG in the national capital.
We are here at the ground. News9 will be tracking the problems of the people.
But the people that we spoke to on ground have a different story to tell.
Will be continuous coverage.
Continuous coverage on News9 in your interest.
This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News9. English news as it should be.
Good morning and thank you so much for tuning in to News9. You are watching Morning Brief at 9. I'm Karthik Malhotra. The big story that we continue to track for you right here on News9 comes from the failed negotiations at Islamabad and US threatening a blockade on the Strait of Hormuz. Mixed views emerging on who exactly will erect the blockade and how Iran will respond. That's what we're tracking for you on the show this morning. Also on the show, stock markets expected to remain choppy. Oil breaches $100 a barrel yet again. Asian markets open in the red. We discuss the possible path ahead with Rohit Srivastav as Q4 earnings kick off in India. And on the show, we decode Delhi's new EV policy, what it means for consumers, what it means for India's oil dependence, and what it means for the environment. All this and more on this edition of Morning Brief at 9. You're watching Morning Brief at 9. First up, a quick look at all the headlines we are tracking for you this Monday morning. US President Donald Trump orders a naval blockade at the Strait of Hormuz, marking a major escalation after failed peace talks with Iran in Islamabad over the weekend. Iran's parliament speaker says Tehran will not bow to threats after Donald Trump orders the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz following collapsed negotiations in Pakistan. Crude jumps sharply past $100 a barrel as failed US-Iran talks trigger fresh fears over global energy supplies. US President Donald Trump threatens 50% tariffs on China if Beijing provides military support to Iran during the conflict. Lebanese Prime Minister Nawaf Salam pushes for a ceasefire even as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu signals continued military operations in the region. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban concedes defeat after 16 years as consecutive challenger. Peter Magyar secures a sweeping election victory. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez begins a key visit to China, aiming to boost trade ties as relations with Washington strain. Delhi government unveils a draft electric vehicle policy proposing a phase-out of new petrol two-wheelers and CNG three-wheelers to accelerate electrification. And in corporate news, Tata Consultancy Services rolls out 25,000 job offers to freshers while warning future hiring will depend on global demand conditions. In a major escalation, U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz following the collapse of peace talks with Iran. U.S. Central Command said it will begin implementing the blockade on all maritime traffic entering and exiting Iranian ports on April 13th, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. That's Tuesday, 7:30 a.m. India time. Now remember, this move comes after recent talks in Islamabad, which, according to the U.S. president, had gone well, but ultimately failed over Tehran's refusal to give up its nuclear ambitions and reopen the critical oil route. Now, Donald Trump also threatened China with steep tariffs if it provides military support to Iran. The development marks a sharp turn in the conflict, raising fears of wider disruption to global energy supplies and a possible expansion of the crisis.
President Donald Trump ordered the U.S. military to blockade the Strait of Hormuz after marathon talks with Iran wrapped up on Sunday with no deal to end the war. In a social media post, Trump said he also told the Navy to, quote, seek and interdict every vessel in international waters that has paid a toll to Iran. It came after U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance announced the failed result in Pakistan's capital, where the talks were held.
We've had a number of substantive discussions with the Iranians. That's the good news. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement.
Both sides blamed each other for the failed negotiations. Vance said Iran chose not to accept American terms, including on nuclear arms.
The simple question is, do we see a fundamental commitment of will for the Iranians not to develop a nuclear weapon, not just now, not just 2 years from now, but for the long term? We haven't seen that yet. We hope that we will.
The talks in Islamabad came after a ceasefire was agreed earlier in the week. They were the first direct U.S.-Iranian meeting in over a decade and the highest level since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei said the two sides reached an understanding on some issues but remained far apart on a few key matters. However, he told Iranian media that diplomacy would continue. He described an atmosphere of mistrust and said it was natural that an agreement could not be reached in a single session.
For the entire region and
Pakistan's Foreign Minister Ishaq Dar urged the two sides to uphold the two-week truce.
Commitment to ceasefire.
He said his country would continue to facilitate engagement to try and end the fighting that has killed thousands and sent global oil prices soaring since it began over 6 weeks ago. During the talks that started on Saturday, 3 supertankers carrying oil, along with some commercial vessels, passed through the Strait of Hormuz, shipping data showed. They appear to be the first oil tankers to exit the Gulf since the ceasefire deal. Hundreds of vessels are still stuck there.
Remember, the U.S. Central Command will begin implementing the naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz from April 13th, 10 p.m. Eastern Time. That's 7:30 a.m. India time tomorrow, targeting all vessels entering or exiting Iranian ports and coastal areas. Now, the enforcement will apply to ships of all nations covering key Iranian ports along the Arabian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. However, the U.S. says it will not disrupt freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz for vessels heading to or from non-Iranian ports. Now, commercial shipping has been advised to stay alert, with mariners asked to monitor official notices and remain in contact with U.S. naval forces while operating in the region. Now, the move marks a significant escalation in the conflict, even as tensions remain high following the breakdown of ceasefire talks in Pakistan. And Iran's delegation left Pakistan on Sunday after marathon talks with the United States failed to produce a breakthrough. Iranian parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf maintained that Tehran country will not surrender under any threats. Now, Ghalibaf, who led Tehran's negotiations at the weekend talks with Washington in Pakistan's capital city, taunted the U.S. president over petrol prices and amid Washington's vow to blockade the Strait of Hormuz. He posted on X an image appearing to show prices per gallon at gas stations in the White House area. He wrote, and I quote, "Enjoy the current pump figures. With the so-called blockade soon, you'll be nostalgic for the $4 to $5 gas." Now, earlier, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Baghaei confirmed that while there were areas of understanding, key differences remained unresolved.
در مورد یک سری از موضوعات ما به تفاهم‌هایی رسیدیم واقعیت اما در مورد دو سه موضوع مهم خب دیدگاه‌ها فاصله داشت و نهایتاً منجر به توافق نشد این گفتگوها. این آخرین وضعیت هست که
And let's go deeper into those proposed nostalgic $4 to $5 per gallon of oil. U.S. consumer prices have surged sharply in the month of March, recording their biggest increase in nearly 4 years as the Iran war has pushed up oil prices and tariffs have continued to feed into those costs. Now, data shows inflation jumped close to 1% for the month, driven largely by a massive spike in fuel prices, especially gasoline or petrol.
A closely watched inflation report on Friday showed that U.S. consumer prices in March rose by the most in nearly 4 years, as the war with Iran led to a record surge in gasoline prices. The Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index jumped 0.9% last month, the largest increase since June 2022, when prices soared in response to the Russia-Ukraine war. March's increase was in line with economists' expectations, but marked a significant leap from February's 0.3% rise. It also put the annual inflation rate at 3.3%, nearly a full percentage point higher than February's year-over-year gain. Fueling the price surge, a record 21.2% jump in gasoline prices, which accounted for nearly 3/4 of the CPI increase.
It's quite significant.
Stephen Cates is a financial analyst with Bankrate.
When we look at gas prices in particular, this is where things really stand out. As a percentage change over a single month, this is the largest since this data was tracked back in 1967.
The so-called core CPI, however, which strips out volatile food and energy prices, rose a modest 0.2% in March after advancing the same amount in February. That put the annual core inflation rate at 2.6%. Still, economists expect the Middle East war to lift core prices in the months ahead, as expensive jet fuel will likely raise airline fares and diesel will increase the cost of goods transported by road. Prices of fertilizer and plastics, among other goods, are also expected to rise. Elevated inflation has led some economists to predict that the Federal Reserve will not lower interest rates this year, a belief that was reinforced this week by the release of minutes from the central bank's March policy meeting, which showed a growing group of policymakers felt that rate hikes might be needed instead.
US President Donald Trump has issued a sharp warning to China, threatening steep tariffs if Beijing provides military support to Iran. Speaking in an interview, Trump said Chinese goods entering the United States could face tariffs as high as 50% if Beijing supports Iran militarily, calling it a staggering penalty. Now, the warning adds a new dimension to the ongoing West Asia conflict, raising the risk of a broader geopolitical and economic confrontation. Despite the tensions, Trump is still scheduled to visit China next month for talks with President Xi Jinping on a range of bilateral issues. Now, the meeting had earlier been delayed due to the Iran war, but now comes at a time of heightened stakes, both on the battlefield and in global trade. Oil prices have surged back above the $100 mark after US-Iran peace talks failed to deliver a breakthrough, and US President Donald Trump ordered a blockade of Iranian ports. Now, US benchmark WTI, or the West Texas Intermediate, jumped nearly 8%, crossing $104 a barrel, while Brent crude also climbed sharply above $102. Now, the spike comes as markets react to renewed supply fears following the collapse of negotiations in Islamabad and fresh military escalation in West Asia. Now, remember, just days ago, oil had fallen and equities had rallied after a fragile ceasefire was announced, but that optimism seems to have quickly faded away. Now, with talks failing and the naval blockade now in play, volatility is back and global markets are once again bracing for uncertainty. Meanwhile, in India, the government has raised export duties on diesel by almost 160% from 21 rupees 50 paisa per litre to as high as 55 rupees 50 paisa per litre. These, remember, are export duties applicable on export of refined diesel to countries outside of India. Now, duties even on ATF or the aviation turbine fuel have been increased by about 42%, from a little under 30 rupees per litre to as much as 42 rupees per litre. The revised rates have come into effect immediately. Now, this according to a statement issued by the Ministry of Finance on Saturday, the 11th of April. The export duties on petrol so far remain unchanged. Now, the decision has come amid volatility in global oil prices, which seem to have made exports more profitable than domestic sales. Now, this has been making several private refiners shift focus towards international markets, hence limiting domestic supply. Now, these practices contributed to reduced fuel availability in certain regions within India. The government's policy aims to strike a balance between profitability and public interest by ensuring sufficient domestic fuel supply by reducing excessive export-driven gains, hence protecting consumers from price shocks. Now, the government aims to address this imbalance and prioritize fuel availability within India. Now, by increasing export duties, authorities intend to discourage excessive exports and ensure that domestic demand is adequately met. Aviation turbine fuel or ATF prices have also been witnessing sharp fluctuations. The revised export duty on ATF is expected to stabilize supply and reduce volatility in aviation fuel pricing in India. And moving on now, Britain has put on hold a key agreement to transfer sovereignty of the Chagos Islands after criticism from US President Donald Trump. The deal, which would hand control of the island to Mauritius, has come under scrutiny due to the strategic imbalance and the strategic importance of the Diageo Gracia military base, jointly used by United States and the United Kingdom. Take a look.
Britain is putting on hold a deal to cede sovereignty of the Chagos Islands after it was criticised by US President Donald Trump. The Indian Ocean island chain is home to the strategic US-British Diego Garcia Air Base. Washington had previously backed the agreement made last year. It would see Britain cede the islands to Mauritius, but retain control of the military base on a 99-year lease. US support is needed for the deal to go ahead. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer's office said on Saturday London would try to persuade Washington to give its formal approval. Trump said in February that the deal was a big mistake, despite having said it was the best that Starmer would get. Ties between the US and UK have become strained over Trump's ambitions to acquire Greenland.
We need Greenland.
And Starmer's reluctance to get Britain involved with the US-Israeli war on Iran.
Not happy with the UK.
A British government spokesperson said ensuring the long-term operational security of Diego Garcia remains a priority, and that it still believes the agreement is the best way forward. Britain forcibly displaced up to 2,000 indigenous Chagosians in the late 1960s and 1970s to establish the base. Recent operations launched from Diego Garcia include bombing strikes against Houthi targets in Yemen in 2024 and 25 and humanitarian aid deployments to Gaza. The campaign group Indigenous Chagosian People has raised questions about what they said were enormous sums of money wasted on a collapsed negotiation. They also doubted the legality of the plan, which they say denies the Chagosians their right to self-determination.
And moving on now, top US financial officials have sounded the alarm over potential cyber risks linked to artificial intelligence. Now, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell held an urgent meeting with major bank CEOs to discuss threats posed by a new AI model from Anthropic. Now, sources say regulators warn that rapidly advancing AI systems could introduce new vulnerabilities, particularly in the financial sector's digital infrastructure.
U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell held an urgent meeting with major bank CEOs this week, warning of cybersecurity risks linked to Anthropic's latest AI model. That's according to two sources familiar with the matter. Anthropic launched its powerful new Mythos model earlier this week, but stopped short of a broad release. citing concerns it could expose previously unknown cybersecurity vulnerabilities. It said Mythos can identify and exploit weaknesses across every major operating system and web browser. Last week, Anthropic said it was in ongoing talks with U.S. government officials about the offensive and defensive cyber capabilities of Mythos. Anna Rothbun is founder and CEO of Grenadilla Advisory.
AI has gotten so smart that it can actually wreak havoc on global systems like banking. This isn't you and me using AI and, AI hallucinating and then us correcting it. That is not where this is happening. This is happening at a very sophisticated enterprise level. So that worries me a bit. But what actually makes me happier or less worried is the fact that the creators of these AI platforms are actually not distributing it yet. And being worried themselves, are actually coming to the regulators and coming to the banking leaders and asking them to have a discussion.
Anthropic says access to Mythos will be limited to about 40 technology companies, including Microsoft and Google. One source said the meeting with Besant and Powell was aimed at ensuring banks understand the risks posed by Mythos and similar models, and are taking steps to protect their systems. Bloomberg News reported that the CEOs of Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Goldman Sachs attended. JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon was unable to join. Goldman Sachs, Wells Fargo, and the Federal Reserve declined to comment. The Treasury, other banks, and Anthropic did not immediately respond to requests for comment.
Okay, moving on now. Russia and Ukraine are accusing each other of violating a brief Easter ceasefire just hours after it came into effect. Now, this 32-hour truce announced to mark Orthodox Easter was meant to offer a pause in the 4-year-long war. But both sides now say the ceasefire was breached almost immediately, with thousands of attacks reported across the front lines.
Moscow and Kyiv accused each other on Sunday of breaking their 32-hour ceasefire to mark Orthodox Easter. Both reported over 1,000 drone and shelling attacks just hours after Saturday's truce began, 4 years into Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry said it recorded 1,971 ceasefire violations overnight into Sunday. Moscow said a child was among those injured in a Ukrainian drone attack. And the Belgorod region's governor reported at least 2 people killed by shelling. Meanwhile, Ukraine reported nearly 480 shelling attacks and over 1,700 drone strikes by Russian troops. Emergency services said 2 people were wounded on Sunday by a drone attack in Kharkiv region. Reuters could not independently verify reports of military activity. At a military Easter service, a Ukrainian soldier said Russian reconnaissance drones were still circling the area, despite the ceasefire. We wanted to evacuate our fallen comrades today, but the Russians are not letting us do so just yet, the soldier said. The Kremlin said Sunday that the truce was a, quote, humanitarian gesture from Russian President Vladimir Putin during the Orthodox holiday, but that Russian troops would resume fighting as soon as it ends. Putin announced the temporary ceasefire on April the 9th, and it is set to end at midnight Sunday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, whose previous ceasefire proposals were turned down by Moscow, agreed to the truce.
All right, and before we move any further, a quick look at Indian stock markets that have just opened in a deep red this morning, in fact performing worse than other Asian markets, including Japan and South Korea. Let's pull up the charts and take a look at Sensex and Nifty, both down about 2% or so. Sensex is down more than 1,600 points, now trading below the levels of 76,000. Meanwhile, Nifty 50 also down almost 500 points, trading at levels of about 23,572. Volatility in the Indian stock markets has crept up again, breaching that level of 20 that it had achieved last week, and now at about 21.49. Small cap and mid cap also equally battered, with the Nifty small cap 100 down about 2.4% at levels of about 15,000. If you pull up the Nifty 50 heat map, you'll say pretty much every single stock on the Nifty 50, barring just Coal India being the one exception, all other 49 out of the 50 stocks trading in the red this morning. The biggest losers seem to be Reliance Industries, which is down about 2.7%, and auto major Maruti Suzuki down almost 3% or so in trade. Meanwhile, even the banking sector, led by HDFC Bank, SBI, both down about 2.6% or so. That's the mood of the market. We will soon get Rohit Srivastav to tell us what to expect, especially given the volatility that we are seeing in the temperature in West Asia and also the quarterly earnings, the Q4 earning calendar here in India in just a bit. Meanwhile, a bad open for stock markets here in India. And moving on now, in a major political upset, Hungary's long-time leader Viktor Orban has conceded defeat after a landslide victory by the opposition TCS party. Now, this result marks a dramatic shift in Hungarian politics, ending Orban's dominant run and signaling voter demand for change. The outcome is also being seen as a setback for Orban's international allies, including US President Donald Trump as well as Russia.
Hungary's veteran nationalist leader Viktor Orban conceded defeat on Sunday after a landslide election victory by the upstart opposition TCS party. The result is a setback for both Orban's allies in Russia and U.S. President Donald Trump's White House. Challenger Peter Magyar's center-right party grabbed a two-thirds majority in parliament, enabling deep institutional reform and allowing the new government to restructure key institutions. The result marks the end to Orban's 16 years in power and has significant implications not only for Hungary, but for the European Union, Ukraine, and beyond. Half an hour before polls were due to close, data showed close to 78% of voters cast ballots, up from nearly 68% 4 years earlier. Orban, a Eurosceptic, carved out a model of an illiberal democracy, seen as a blueprint by Trump's Make America Great Again movement and its admirers in Europe. But many Hungarians have grown increasingly weary of the 62-year-old after 3 years of economic stagnation and soaring living costs, as well as reports of oligarchs close to the government amassing more wealth. TCS leader Magyar successfully tapped into this frustration in the win. Orban's exit deprives Russian President Vladimir Putin of his main ally in the EU and sends shockwaves through Western right-wing circles, including the White House.
All right, with that, let's slip into a quick commercial break. When we come back, a close look at the stock markets, not just in India, but also in Asia. Remember, oil has breached that $100 a mark yet again. And markets in Asia first to react to the spike in oil prices and the US naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz reacting negatively. We'll bring you Rohit Srivastav with an educated view on where the markets are headed from here.
Others see a teenage tantrum. I see you standing your ground. The world sees stubbornness. I see a soft, soft heart. I see you, my daughter, 16 and already owning your story. And I couldn't be more proud. For you, only natural diamonds.
खेलता है झूलता उछलता है दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया
Ahead of 2026 West Bengal Assembly election, polarization in West Bengal sharpens.
टीएमसी सरकार के जाने का काउंटडाउन शुरू हो चुका है।
हम डिटेक्ट, डिलीट और डिपोर्ट ये पॉलिसी के तहत एक एक घुसपैठियों को बंगाल के बाहर निकालने का काम करेंगे।
There are three prime issues: citizenship, border, identity. Is it the Nirmam Sarkar versus May J. Babu?
যতই করো হামলা জিতবে কিন্তু বাংলা।
Who will retain the throne in West Bengal? Can West Bengal look beyond the muddy water of violent politics?
From the ground, the questions that matter, the voices that shape the vote. India votes. Only on News9.
The LPG shortage is now being felt across several cities in India. As our reporters travel across the country to bring you the ground reality.
It's impacting your and my kitchen.
Gas crisis hits kitchen fires. Restaurants and small businesses shutting down.
Very difficult because everything runs on LPG.
Supply shortage, hoarding or panic buying.
कहाँ भी कोई भी 3000 दे तुरंत सिलेंडर मिलेगा.
What's the government doing to control the crisis?
So the question is whether India is prepared.
News9 ground reports.
Growing uncertainty over the availability of LPG in the national capital.
We are here at the ground. News9 will be tracking the problems of the people.
But the people that we spoke to on ground have a different story to tell.
Will be continuous coverage.
Continuous coverage on News9 in your interest.
In Tamil Nadu, the battle over language returns.
ஒரே மொழி பேசுகிறோம், ஒரே எதிர்காலத்தை நோக்கி நடக்கிறோம்.
Election about identity, loyalty.
Bye bye Stalin.
Dravida model versus double engine की सरकार.
बीजेपी एनडीए की डबल इंजन सरकार बनना तय है.
The stakes are high.
From the ground, the questions that matter. The voices that shape the vote. India votes. Only on News9.
Welcome back. You're watching Morning Brief at 9 this Monday morning. First up, a quick look at all the action in stock markets across Asia. The first to react to the naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz after talks in Pakistan collapsed. The Hang Seng is down about 1.3%. South Korea's Kospi is down about 1.4%. Japan's Nikkei 225 also down about 1%. Not as volatile an action visible across the Shanghai Composite Index as well as Taiwan's TAIEX Index. But pretty much all of Asia opening in the red this morning. Well, India seems to be bleeding a lot more than rest of Asia, with the Sensex and Nifty 50 both opening in deeper shades of red, both down about 2% or so. Last seen Sensex and Nifty 50 both down. In fact, Sensex was down about 1600 plus points at the start of trade. 10 minutes into it, it has recovered some of those losses, but still about 1540 points below Friday's closing. Now trading marginally higher than the 76,000 levels. Nifty 50 also down about 1.9%, down about 460 points at levels of about 23,600 or so. Volatility in the Indian stock markets is higher by about 14% or so, once again above that level of 20, indicating markets can turn volatilely any direction, higher or lower. Let's pull up the Nifty 50 heat map and try and see which are the stocks which are leading the pain this morning. And it seems that Reliance Industries, the heavyweight in Nifty 50, is down about 2.7%. Maruti Suzuki is down more than 3%, in fact 3.25 percentage point or so. And SBI also down more than 3%. These seem to be the biggest losers right now in trade, and even Eternal, despite that sort of positive rating from Goldman Sachs, is trading about 1.5% lower in trade this morning. Rohit Srivastava, founder and market strategist at India Charts, joins us this morning. Good morning, Rohit. Not exactly a good morning for investors or traders on Dalal Street. India is taking a much harder beating than rest of Asia after talks in Pakistan failed. Why do you see such a strong reaction coming from Indian investors?
Well, the only logic over here is the oil trade, because India is a significant oil importer, and most of it comes out of Saudi Arabia. So I think that is the only direct connection that we can draw as to why India is reacting a little more sharply than other parts of the world. And that's also been the reason overall, I think, during this entire phase in March, we did fall the most as well among emerging markets. So we did take the biggest hit. We are still seeing volatility, but I do sense that we have entered what I would call as the de-escalation phase, which is a good thing, that we will slowly be coming out of this. It's not going to be a straight line. And we are going through the back and forth that usually happens when talks are, attempting to be done from a very, very extreme situation. But I would still call it the de-escalation phase, which means things get better, even though there is still some volatility around.
So you're calling it de-escalation. Not sure if a lot of strategic experts out there, geopolitical experts out there are seeing it as de-escalation just as yet, given the latest that we are picking up from the US naval blockade at the Strait of Hormuz. But again, a lot of confusion around who's going to implement the blockade and which are the vessels which will be allowed to pass. Is it only going to be restricted to Iranian ports? And how is Iran going to sort of, counter the blockade? All those are still sort of, finer details which are yet to emerge. Meanwhile, oil prices, Rohit, continue to sort of remain volatile, and the kind of corrections and the kind of spikes that we've seen in oil prices definitely mean bad news for India. But India, at the same time, the Indian government is saying that exports of diesel and exports of ATF are going to be more expensive in a bid to obviously protect the domestic economy. But overall, what does that mean for oil refining companies, especially the likes of Reliance Industries?
No, I think we have a lot of room to navigate. We have a case where we can actually get our supplies from different countries, and that room is there. You can get more from Russia. So we are really not in a energy crisis, but definitely, with all these sanctions and all the pressure points, it makes it difficult for not just India but many other countries, especially in Europe, to navigate. And that's, I think, what this blockade is really doing. It is putting pressure on countries that have not been openly or directly supporting the US in the conflict to really come out. That is what I think this pressure point really does, because it will not allow ships to move through that strait, even those that have been trying to negotiate with Iran. Like Italy was going to fly down last week, and Ireland has been saying they have needs, and everybody wants to directly negotiate with Iran, but the US is saying, no, we're not going to let that happen unless you really support us in getting this thing through. So this is going to be a little tough. I'm not sure how it ends, but I think this all, like I said, this is part of a negotiation process. It is not really one that goes back to war, because clearly if you speak to any of the military analysts, they'll tell you that an outright war and attacks don't really make sense, because they will not end well for anyone in the world. So that's the real big call, is that if something is not going to benefit anybody, I believe it's not going to happen. So we are not going to go back into war. But de-escalating is not going to be a straight line, because not everybody agrees on all the things that are out there. And it's going to take some time to build trust with Iran to, agree to the terms now that, all that has happened. So I think we'll have to give it time. The time is also a pain point, because the longer this takes, it does hurt the global economy. It does push you closer and closer to the potential of a recession. And I think that's what people are also worried about, that, will this take too long? And if it takes too long, will it result in a recessionary environment or a stagflationary environment for the rest of the world? So that's also another risk that we are dealing with. So the hope is that, of course, they get through all of this faster and not take too long.
All right. Let's also talk about, Rohit, some stocks in focus this morning. Eternal, Goldman Sachs has maintained a buy rating on Eternal. It is betting on Blinkit's growth despite competitive pressures. What is your view on Eternal, especially on a day like today when the stock is in any case correcting down about 2% or so?
So, at the early part of March, we did take a slightly cautious stance towards the platform-based companies, not naming anyone in specific, but it was a very broad call on the segment as a whole. We'll have to review it very, very carefully as to whether we should take a counter stance on that. Not only were they highly valued, but the numbers really have not been kicking in. So you have to really look 3 years, 5 years down the line and make projections to be able to consider these ideas as a strong buy. For the time being, I'm still avoiding them. Maybe only one or two can make the buck, but we'll have to understand that. But broadly, I've been avoiding the segment.
So avoiding the segment is the word coming in from Rohit. Rohit, let's stick to the broader theme of IT stocks. And IT stocks, of course, with Q4 earnings, TCS earnings already out, Wipro expected later this week. And, of course, the sort of market anticipation of mixed results with respect to, of course, AI disruption. Your broad view on IT stocks, again, at a time when we are looking at steep corrections across all cap sizes of IT stocks.
I think IT stocks, because they fell early in February, became pretty oversold in March. And, in the latter part of the sell-off, we saw IT stocks actually outperform. So there's a case that they've probably bottomed for now. and there might be a good trade in IT stocks over the next quarter. And so I wouldn't mind taking that bet. But if I think longer term, it's still a sector that I generally have avoided for many, many years and will continue to avoid from an investment standpoint, simply because their earnings growth rates have been far lower than the market's growth rates, and that makes them relatively expensive. They only come in as defensive bets during a market decline, where they actually help by falling less, or acting as a defense, simply because you'll always need IT and there's some growth. But otherwise, that growth rate continues to be below market rates during growth phases when you really want to invest elsewhere.
Right. And finally, your view on auto stocks, given, of course, the EV expansion plans, and also in the light of Delhi's new EV policy, which is open for public consultation right now. But how do you see auto stocks, particularly, the four-wheeler stocks and the two-wheeler stocks from here on?
A very interesting space. I think we've seen a significant consolidation over the last 2 years in the auto space, and that may have come to its close. And as the market recovers from here, I think auto stocks will actually do pretty well. Some of them were actually showing positive growth for quite some time, which the market was not fully pricing in. And you'll start seeing that in the months ahead as things stabilize. So I think auto sector is an interesting one to really get back into. It's often a lead indicator of economic activity as well. So as things improve, the auto sector and financials are the first two that start giving you signals that things are getting better. In fact, financials also, the kind of rebound you saw in banking stocks last week is a sign of things coming back to normalcy. Surely today everything's reacting negatively because of the news flow over the weekend. But as long as we stay above the gap zone that we made, when we rebounded last week, a huge gap on the start of the ceasefire, I think that gap is going to act as the key support that we'll be watching. And again, coming back to the idea of financials and autos, I think are lead indicators that are signaling better times ahead.
Better times ahead is the signal coming from auto and banking stocks. Let's leave it at that. Rohit Srivastava, thank you so much. As always, pleasure having you here with us on News9.
Thank you.
And before we slip into another break, India's largest IT services company, Tata Consultancy Services, has made 25,000 job offers to fresh graduates for FY27, signaling continued hiring in the IT sector. However, CEO K. Krithivasan has made it clear that any further hiring will depend on demand conditions as the company adopts a cautious stance amid global uncertainty. TCS had hired around 44,000 freshers last year, making this year's intake more measured and demand-driven. The company says its hiring strategy remains closely aligned with business needs, with fresher onboarding requiring longer training, while lateral hires can be deployed faster. Importantly, CEO Krithivasan also clarified that last year's layoffs were not driven by artificial intelligence, but by shift in how projects are being executed, reducing the need for senior level roles. The comments come as the IT sector navigates evolving demand patterns and structural changes in the way technology services are delivered. For now, hiring continues, but with a sharper focus on efficiency and future-ready talent. And with that, we will slip into another very short break. But coming up on the other side, Delhi government's new EV policy, what it means for consumers, what it means for automakers, and more importantly, what it means for the environment, and how soon can effects begin to show. That on the other side. You're watching Morning Brief at 9.
Sometimes I'm confused, sometimes distracted. Still, I chase my dreams. I raise my voice for what I believe in. Winning at life is my habit. Yes. My life is in my hands. Senco presents Bengal Utsav.
पढ़ता है, खेलता है, झूलता उछलता है, दौड़ता कभी कभी दौड़ कराता है, आगे आगे बढ़ता है इंडिया, अमूल दूध पीता है इंडिया.
In Tamil Nadu, the battle over language returns.
ஒரே மொழி பேசுகிறோம், ஒரே எதிர்காலத்தை நோக்கி நடக்கிறோம்.
Election about identity, loyalty.
Bye-bye, Stalin!
Dravida model versus double engine की सरकार.
बीजेपी एनडीए की डबल इंजन सरकार बनना तय है.
The stakes are high.
From the ground, the questions that matter. The voices that shape the vote. India votes. Only on News 9.
Welcome back. You're watching News 9. This is Morning Brief at 9. Well, the Delhi government has unveiled its draft electric vehicle policy 2026 to 2030, laying out an ambitious roadmap to tackle air pollution and boost clean mobility in the national capital. Now, with vehicular emissions accounting for nearly 23% of Delhi's pollution, the policy aims to accelerate EV adoption while strengthening the support ecosystem. Now, under the draft, electric cars priced up to 30 lakh rupees will get a full exemption on road tax and registration fees till the year 2030. Additionally, petrol two-wheeler registrations will be banned from April of 2028. Remember, also, new three-wheelers must be electric from 2027. In addition to that, there is up to 1 lakh rupees worth of incentives for electric cars linked to scrapping old vehicles and purchase of new EVs within 6 months of scrappage. Electric two-wheeler subsidy is also available for up to 30,000 rupees initially and 25,000 rupees incentive for electric auto rickshaws. The expansion of charging stations and battery infrastructure across Delhi is also on the table. Remember, the policy also proposes phased electrification of school buses and a complete transition of government fleets to electric alongside a large-scale push for charging and battery swapping infrastructure. Authorities say the plan is linked to the right to clean air with a strong focus on cutting emissions and improving public health. The draft has now been opened for public feedback before it gets finalized for rollout. Well, joining me to discuss this is Ankita Patwa, Environmental Manager, Foxconn EV, and Arun Malhotra, Automobile Industry Expert and former Managing Director of Nissan India. Ankita, to you first. With the new EV policy, will it significantly reduce Delhi's air pollution crisis, or will the environmental benefits actually depend on how India generates its electricity and quickly pivots to cleaner electricity production rather than just phasing out petrol and diesel cars?
Thank you for having me here. But I think to your question, the switch to EVs is not the only solution. Vehicular emissions contribute towards 23%. The rough average is from 15 to 39%. So that is not the only solution to shifting. Even if we go, and I think the biggest environmental concern, particularly with Delhi, has been the AQI, which has been poor, severe. Also during winter, it becomes near hazardous. So even if we go to 100% adoption of this new changes or policy amendments that are being proposed, even with 100% adoption, you're looking at a 15% reduction from the current AQI that you're looking at. So from a 217 AQI that's today in Delhi, you're looking at 151.
Okay, so a step in the right direction, but definitely far from being enough, if I hear you correctly. But Arun Malhotra, if EV adoption rises sharply in Delhi, is there going to be a meaningful jump in India's sort of reduction in dependence of crude oil, especially given the sky-high oil prices right now? Do you think this policy is going to be enough to sort of at least reduce India's oil dependence, especially from the Gulf regions?
Thank you for making me join this discussion. First of all, what Ankita mentioned is clearly the pollution cost from emission from vehicles is 23%. So you have to also focus on other areas. The second part is Delhi is still just 6 to 7% of the market. So if you need a reduction in the import bill, the least which could have been done is for NCR, because the free flow vehicles between Faridabad, Gurgaon, Ghaziabad, Noida to Delhi, you can't have this policy applicable in Delhi, whereas the free flow vehicles coming from other parts with the UP or from Haryana. So that extent, the policy has to be thought through. I believe it's a step in the right direction. Plus, one of the challenges this policy has been when they are talking of two-wheelers, from 2028 only petrol to be banned totally. Today, 2/3 of the two-wheelers are motorcycles, and there we have virtually no motorcycle available in the EV space. And whatever is available is at 2.5 lakh rupee price as compared to entry point 80,000.
Right.
So all these factors will have to take in. There's a lot of granularity which is required.
Right.
One is step in the right direction. Then how do you implement? Second is incorporate NCR and take up with other challenges and look at it in a very judicious, balanced manner.
All right. Ankita, for the consumer specifically, I think, one takeaway of this draft policy is that now, for once, the focus isn't really on the supply side. The focus is on demand side, especially with all the incentives now in place, at least as far as the consultation paper goes. Now, we are seeing a gradual sort of, doing away with PLI-like schemes which were beneficial to automakers. And now the focus is shifting squarely to the consumer. The incentives given in the policy, are they strong enough financially to at least motivate consumers to look at electric as a viable option?
That's a great question. Just based on data, incentive is what will drive mass adoption. You have seen it historically happen with economies like US. You've seen it happen with China on larger scale. So yes, this is a step in the right direction, but do I agree with the incentives are enough? Probably not, because we're still way behind in terms of infrastructure. And I think the resale value of a used car, the anxiety of a resale of a used electric car would probably create more consumer anxiety. The lack of infrastructure on charging capacity, I think, is also what needs to be considered for the incentives to be enough. Yes, it's a good start from the FAME 2 that was initially announced. The benefits have reduced, but I think there's still not enough to support the consumers.
Okay, still not enough to support the consumers. Arun, final question to you. Now, of course, you mentioned that Delhi accounts for about 6% of total vehicles which are sold in the country. But if you just look at cars alone, 40 lakh cars sold in the country, a little more than that, in fact, and 6% of that comes to about 2.5 to 3 lakh cars being sold in Delhi alone. Now, with this sort of pivot to electrification, do you think manufacturers and the overall supply chain, is it geared enough to sort of meet this surge which is likely to come if this policy does go into action?
If you look at it, there has been a ascendancy on sales, and March 2026 was an inflection point. 22,000 electric vehicle cars were sold and about 2 lakh two-wheelers EVs were sold. I believe in each of these segments there are 5 to 6 major players. So clearly, I think the industry is geared up as far as production is concerned. The only challenge remains is when you have continually things like rare earth metals or lithium and our relations with China, we're still dependent on the chain till the production-linked incentive and advanced cell chemistry starts kicking and we get the benefit of it. So that is the moot question at this point of time. But clearly, I think the industry, as far as production is concerned, is clearly geared up. I don't think that is a challenge at all.
All right. No challenge as far as the supply side goes. Well, let's leave it at that. Ankita, Patwa, Arun Malhotra, thank you so much. Pleasure having you here with us on News9 to give that perspective to this developing story.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And moving on now, India's streaming revolution is hitting a new milestone with the country's OTT market now reaching a massive 1.45 billion monthly active users. That's according to the latest report by brokerage firm CLSA, which highlights how cheap data and rising smartphone usage are powering this explosive growth. Now, the market has grown by 20% over the last 3 years and registered a 2% increase in the past 12 months alone. Now, in terms of platform performance, YouTube continues to dominate with over 770 million users, far ahead of rivals, while Jio Hotstar follows with nearly 390 million users. In the premium streaming race, Netflix has now overtaken Amazon Prime Video in India with around 92 million users compared to Prime's 67 million, reflecting a shift in consumer preference. Meanwhile, some platforms are struggling with services like MX Player seeing a decline in user base, highlighting the intense competition in the market. It is, however, important to note that these figures include some overlap as many users subscribe to multiple OTT platforms at the same time. Now, this report by CLSA also projects that the number of smartphone users in India is expected to rise nearly 20% to 885 million by FY28. The bottom line seems to be this: India's OTT boom is maturing fast, and the real battle now is for attention, not just membership. And finally, as we draw to a close on this edition, NASA's Artemis 2 crew has received a hero's welcome after returning from their historic journey around the moon. Astronauts Reid Wiseman, Viktor, Christina Koch and Jeremy Hansen landed back on Earth on Friday before arriving in Houston to celebrations and applause. Now, the four-member crew traveled nearly 700,000 miles, completing a lunar flyby that took them closer to the moon than any humans in over half a century. At a NASA event on Sunday, the astronauts spoke about their experience, expressing gratitude for being part of the mission that reignites humanity's return to deep space. Artemis 2 marks the first crewed test flight in NASA's ambitious program, which aims to land astronauts on the moon again by 2028. Let's leave it at that and listen to what the astronauts had to say.
This was not easy. Being 200,000 plus miles away from home, like before you launch, it feels like it's the greatest dream on Earth. And when you're out there, you just want to get back to your families and your friends. It's a special thing to be a human, and it's a special thing to be on planet Earth.
When we saw Tiny Earth, people asked our crew what impressions we had. And honestly, what struck me wasn't necessarily just Earth. It was all the blackness around it. Earth was just this lifeboat hanging undisturbingly in the universe.
Viktor, Christina, and Jeremy, we are bonded forever. And no one down here is ever going to know what the four of us just went through. And it was the most special thing that will ever happen in my life.
Y'all hear the bell ringing?
Ahead of 2026 West Bengal Assembly election, polarization in West Bengal sharpens.
टीएमसी सरकार के जाने का काउंटडाउन शुरू हो चुका है।
हम डिटेक्ट, डिलीट और डिपोर्ट ये पॉलिसी के तहत एक एक घुसपैठियों को बंगाल के बाहर निकालने का काम करेंगे।
There are three prime issues: citizenship, border, identity. Is it the Nirmam Sarkar